You are listening to the Football Diehards podcast with your hosts, Justin Lonero and Bob Harris, sponsored by DraftKings. Sign up now using promo code DIEHARDS, DIEHARDS. Make a first-time $5 deposit, and you'll receive a free $3 ticket.
Hello and welcome to the Football Diehards podcast. I'm your host, Justin Lonero, along with my co-hosts, Mr. Bob Harris and Mr. Kyle Dvorchak. It is the first week of June. It is good to have you guys on the line this evening. Mr. Harris, what is going on in Albuquerque, New Mexico this evening, sir?
Oh, we're doing the usual kind of drill this time of year, producing a entire batch of fantasy magazines, annuals, if you will, the 30th anniversary edition of the Fantasy Football Pro Forecast. Will be among them the Cheat Sheets and Football Diehards magazines. The Draft Book magazine, you and Kyle will be playing significant roles in most all of them. You in the Draft Book, most notably, Justin. You've chiseled out your role in the experts polls. We've added Kyle to the mix a bit this year, and some of his writings will appear as well throughout the broad range of fantasy sports publications, magazines, and good on him for that. And we're going to have him. We're going to pick up the pace with Kyle a little bit, too, on the website work to go with the pods and such like. And so we're looking forward to all of that. But, you know, that's kind of the thing here. What about over there, Justin? I know you're out, you know, you got your other pod. What is that other pod? Tell me what's going on with that, because I don't know if I'm woke enough. I'm pretty old. I'm pretty white. I don't know.
Well, I decided to do a podcast on life with my partner, Ruben Stanford, a kind gentleman, a friend of mine from Brooklyn, New York. You know, he's very black. I'm very white. Our producer is a childhood friend, and we talk about life, and we talk about stuff that is uncomfortable for people to talk about, whether it's addiction or low-paying jobs or unions and a little bit of politics. We have a health beat at the end. My friend is a personal trainer.
Yeah.
Last week,
I got to say, I've listened to some of this, and though I joked at the beginning, it's a good learning experience for some of us who need to learn, and rather entertaining at that. So go out on your iTunes things and check it out. What is the name of that podcast so I don't screw it up, Justin?
Disturbing the Peace podcast. We are available everywhere. Everywhere. Check us out.
All right. There's your
in my room. I'm checking. You guys aren't doing live shows?
No.
Smoke signals?
Not yet. Although I did interview Fred Siegel, the man behind Freezing Cold Takes, the other day, and I will tell you guys, you know, he's a guy you don't want to get zapped on Twitter with, or because if you say something inaccurate, he'll find you. The nicest guy you will ever talk to, Fred Siegel, Freezing Cold Takes. It was a hell of an interview.
Something to be said for accountability. And as fantasy players and, people, professionals, one of the ways we're held accountable is we get out and we compete against the folks, compete against each other. In many cases, we'll all be doing that in the magazines. And we'll also be doing it via the annual Scott Fish Bowl. It's Scott Fish Bowl 9. Justin, we have special things going on here.
Yeah, we do. In fact, Scott was kind enough to talk to me today, in fact, about giving a listener an entry to the Scott Fish Bowl 9. This thing, and Bob, you can attest to this, it has just gone up and up and up in terms of numbers. It's for a good cause. I think there's 1,500 entrants this year. It's everybody you could imagine. Industry experts are in it, regular guys, fans, and it's something that people, it's like crack almost. People want to get in it. People want to be involved. The format varies year to year, but it's something nice to be a part of. It's a slow draft. So we're going to go ahead and give a listener entry away, give it away on Twitter in the next week or so. But it's, man, Kyle, you were in it last year, and you'll probably be in again this year, and you can attest as well that it's a fun league to be a part of. And if these are people we interact with on Twitter, they're, you know, whether it's Dave Richard or Brad Evans. I think the Evan Silva's of the world. Of course, Bob Harris is in it. It's a fun time.
Tons of people and tons of, average folks out playing against us to show their mettle. And many of them did that against me last season. Not my best showing was Scott Fish Bowl 8, but I will say, the great cause is kind of an industry charity, fantasycares.net. You should go there anyway. You were free to make donations last year. And they purchased toys for the kids at Christmas time. Last year they raised over $44,000, the fantasy community did. And they bought gifts in 8 different cities to buy the children gifts, and they'll be doing that again this time around as always. So be mindful of that. So we'll be giving that away on the Twitter box. I understand. Is that what you're saying, Justin?
Yes.
This will be a Twitter.
Yeah.
All right. So
I tweeted it out tonight. The contest above our show link, and I'll give it at random. It's got quite a bit of traction so far, and we'll let it build some more steam and give it away next week. Have you seen the T-shirts, by the way, that Scott?
I have. RotoWare has shirts out.
Beautiful.
Yeah, RotoWare doing a great job too, by the way. Congratulations to them on their massive growth. And some of the, the speed that they come out with designs and cash in on momentary things has been amazing, and really great to see people in the industry come on that strong and pull that off. So yeah, there are shirts out there. Go to rotoware.com. Not a sponsor, but I sponsor them myself because I love what they do. They just do great work. And a lot of people out there doing great work. Some of them are us because we're playing in best ball leagues.
Let me jump in here, Bob. I want to circle back 2 things. One, in the freezing cold takes guy, Justin, did you mention the Patrick Mahomes situation, or did you maybe leave that one off? I
bet he left it off.
Left it off. Well, interesting.
It's interesting how we came about. Now I was inaccurate about Zeke Elliott a few years ago. He put me on blast. Then the Patrick Mahomes take. Some lovely person suggested that he should check out my inaccurate Patrick Mahomes take, and
I was bored that day. I apologize.
So I reached out. I said, "Hey, man, what the hell are you doing?" And then and just like that. This is what makes social media, which Sigmund Bloom, who does the intro to this show, calls it the golden age. Twitter bringing people together. All of a sudden, Fred and I are buddies, and he's on the podcast, and it might be an interesting guest to have on this show. But nicest guy you'll ever talk to. But yes, our relationship formed because of my inaccuracy towards Patrick Mahomes, although you guys weren't that keen on him either, so I don't feel
give me that. Do not.
Relatively speaking, we were magnitudes keener on him than you.
But, the second thing I want to circle back to is just because I don't mean to put you on blast, Justin, without bringing up some of my own shortcomings. Cry me a river, Bob. You had a rough Scott Fishbowl 8. I nearly came in last.
I might have.
It happens. I don't know. It's a competitive league. Competitive.
There comes a point where you quit looking, right? So,
let's get into it. Enough about how bad we are at this. Let's talk about how good we are at it.
I do some of these things, like I'll be in the Pros versus Joes again this year. I've done that a few times. I mean, those are really fun leagues. We do some listener leagues with the Football Die Hard show on Sirius XM, and that's always a blast. And look, it's fun to play against these guys because, the thing that I've said, there's a reason I've been in this business 26 years. It's because I don't, sit here and assume that I know more than everyone in the world. I think this is my opinion, but I think the thing that's great about this industry is we're guys who are, I would call myself fantasy professional over an expert because I do this every day. That does not make me any more knowledgeable or less knowledgeable than the people to play against. And I think what I've learned over time is everyone in our audience is pretty sure they could be doing my job were it not for some quirk of fate. And I don't know that they're wrong, right? Granted, there's a lot that, there's some sacrifice and things like that to go into this, but, the knowledge, the playing of the game, we all know how to do that. And I think, that's one of the things we do at Football Diehards is, I'm not the expert. My job is to make you the expert, right? And that's kind of the approach we take. So competing against, the people that I kind of consider our audience, who are also peers at playing the game, is a lot of fun and a lot of fun for them too. So every opportunity I get to do that, I try to do that.
To your point, I want to say in the past few years, if not on the lifetime of the Pros vs. Joes series, I want to say Joes are up consistently. They've had they've won more championships over the past X years, pretty much every year.
Right.
But to your point, you're making them better through, hopefully.
Well, right.
Through all the stuff you put out. So maybe that's really a pat on your back how good the Joes are doing against you.
I think one of the things is we're every year I'm in 30 leagues, right? And it's hard for me to keep up with the waivers and put the emphasis in. And that's not to make excuses because I'm doing my waivers and stuff. But to be realistic about it, the number of leagues I'm in, I put a little bit of stress on myself to keep up. Now there are some that I will be focusing on more carefully than others. Scott Fishbowl, I'm coming for you. But that's the case every year. You kind of have to prioritize a little bit. So I think some of these leagues where we're playing, with people out in the audience is always, those are always the leagues where I'm putting a little better effort. And even at that, and the Scott Fish, last year was a brutal beatdown, and I'm looking forward to redemption this year.
Good stuff. Really good stuff.
All right, well, that's the show. Everyone go home.
All right. No, I want to get into best ball because, last year I started best balling in about February, right? And I think, and my series co-host Mike Dempsey probably was in 100 leagues before the draft, the NFL draft even started. I've been in a number of drafts this year. A lot of them kind of the industry drafts we've been talking about, some really interesting dynasty leagues that I'm in, startup dynasties, and one from our buddy Scott Barrett at Pro Football Focus. That, the drafting took place, the rookie draft took place before the draft, and the regular startup draft took place as free agency was just getting rolling. And I mean, there were times during the course of that draft where, literally developments are happening that are, destroying the value or creating immense value for players already drafted or about to be drafted. And so I decided this year I'd hold off a little bit on the best ball. And now I'm jumping in now that we're post draft and we kind of have a pretty good feel for who's wearing which helmets in all these cases and what the opportunities might be. So I wanted to, thought it'd be a good idea to go through. I'm sure a number of our listeners out there are playing in best ball too. There are a number of places to play. It's a set and forget kind of league. You draft and basically your lineups are determined each week, if you're not familiar with this, by the high scorers. So you don't actually have to put in a lineup. Your lineup's created for you based on your highest score. So there's a little bit of strategy that goes with that, of course, and that you maybe, you can take chances on players who are more spike performers, and that creates some additional value down the draft board a little bit. But I know you guys are playing as well now, so let's start out and talk a little bit about the high end of the draft, the first round, because I think there's some interesting things going on here. And we'll start with, the kind of the newsy thing. A lot of people talking about Todd Gurley of the Los Angeles Rams. We've talked about him in every pod this offseason because the knee is a bit of a mystery, and the reporting this week has been a bit more hyperbolic, if you will. Jay Glazer from The Athletic, who rarely says anything unless it really means something, came out at one point this past week and said the Rams have legitimate concerns. We kind of knew that. Ian Rappaport came out subsequently and basically said that his days of being a feature back are over. We know they drafted Darrell Henderson, a guy that can at least chip in and, a pretty good playmaker, if nothing else. So Todd Gurley, still the ADP is 7 at Best Ball's 10s, where I play most of mine at. How comfortable are you guys drafting Todd Gurley in the first round right now? Justin, go.
Not at all. This is a result of wear and tear, and he's gotten the football more than anybody. You failed to mention Malcolm Brown, who can be had late in these drafts. I mean, it's a Rams offense that has a lot of mouths to feed. Cooper Kupp coming back. We saw what Robert Woods is capable of doing. And Brandon Cooks had another terrific year, and I'm interested to see what the Gerald Everetts of the world can do. So a lot of mouths to feed. I will be, something. This knee issue has gone back to his days in college. There's some skepticism, and definitely now. However, I have heard that he's gone in round 3 as early as today. And if Todd Gurley is around in round 3, particularly with my approach, where I like to attack wide receivers at least rounds 1 and 2, and Todd Gurley sitting there round 3, I will take him. It's a long off season. There's a lot of chatter. I don't know how much of it is true, but we certainly know that he's had knee issues, and the Rams have a crowded offense. So I will avoid him in rounds 1 and 2, but I will certainly gamble with him round 3 if he dips that deep.
Right. I should stipulate, if you're just getting in on the fun and people are kind of picking this up, that the reporting is he has an arthritic condition. Surgery won't repair it. They're working to manage his workload. He's talked about playing at a lighter weight. All these things are very nerve-wracking. Kyle and I were at a draft for the Cheat Sheets magazine about a week or so ago, where Mike Dempsey drafted Todd Gurley in the middle of the second round. Kyle, how would you feel about that? The second round a little more comfortable for you, or do you have the 10-foot pole out and you're just not touching him at all?
I think the second round is right where I guess in economic terms you reach that sort of equilibrium. For me, I'm looking for value more often. I got him in the third round today in a best ball draft, and I was very happy about that. Mm-hmm. And in terms of that league specifically, when I'm playing with, which doesn't happen often, but if I am playing with experts, I'm kind of shooting for first all the time. So I'll be going a little more risky. I'm fine with that. So I actually thought that was a pretty good pick by Mike. I just think as you go on through the summer, he'll continue to fall. So, if you've got an early pick in the third round, be on the watch out for him. Set him up in your queue because it's happening, people. You're getting Todd Gurley in the third round. If you do take him, especially right now, you can get in drafts where you can get Todd Gurley in the third and Darrell Henderson at the seventh. That's, and I really do think there's a strong possibility that those two guys both provide weekly fantasy value a la Mark Ingram, Alvin Kamara.
Sure. Yeah, if there are weeks where Todd Gurley disappears altogether, as there was last year, I mean, there's no reason to believe, C.J. Anderson can roll off the couch at 300 pounds or whatever. I mean, I'm exaggerating, obviously, but he can roll off the couch in December and rack up big time yardage. And, I think that's a situation worth watching. And generally speaking, and I think it's something that, that you kind of mentioned here, Kyle, you could have different kinds of lineups, right? You can play it safe some. I think most of us drafted enough of these best balls where we can take different approaches. And in fact, I kind of use it as a laboratory to hone my regular drafting because I think the early picks tend to stay the same. But as we look at ADP here, Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, Christian McCaffrey, and Alvin Kamara, almost universally. I don't think I've been in a draft where those guys haven't been in the top four. Justin, do you have any arguments?
No, not at all. I mean, in fact, and you could use those guys anywhere from 1 to 4. I wouldn't be mad at you for taking Zeke 1. But after 4, you'll see David Johnson. Obviously, there's some skepticism there. We love David Johnson. We're eager to see him perform the way he did a couple years ago. I don't know. Melvin Gordon tends to get nicked up. But in that realm, right after McCaffrey, you're going to see people drafting DeAndre Hopkins, and rightfully so.
Yep.
Devontae Adams land, and then you start getting into Le'Veon Bell territory. Melvin Gordon, it's kind of scary there. But if you do have 1, 2, 3, or 4, which I do not like drafting from that spot, you're almost obligated to grab one of those 4 running backs. And permitting they stay healthy, they should all have close to 2,000 yards from the line of scrimmage.
Right. I do think there's a dicey range after that. And it starts, the current ADP, Melvin Gordon's going a little ahead, but Gurley's in that group, Le'Veon Bell, James Conner's in that group. And then I think you kind of come out of that group of risky plays into a group of maybe safer plays, starting with the Joe Mixon range almost for me, who I almost feel more comfortable. Dalvin Cook, granted he has the injury issues. Kyle, how do you feel about that? And do you agree? I mean, is DeAndre Hopkins for you the consensus number 1 wide receiver? Give me your top 3 or 4 guys, maybe wide receivers that you're comfortable going with, if not in the first round, then certainly early in the second.
Yeah, so I agree completely. There are the top 4 running backs who I don't know if I've been in a draft where you don't see some combination of those guys go 1 through 4. And I think I've seen them all, even Alvin Kamara once or twice in my best balls go 1. Usually Saquon. I've done Zeke once at 1 because I got 1 like 3 times in a row and I just want to diversify my early picks. And so you get those 4 guys. And then I'm very confident in my next tier being 3 wide receivers. And those would be Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins first, but Devontae Adams a close second, and Juju Smith-Schuster third. I am all aboard the Juju train. I still think this offense is going to operate just like we saw before, and I think Juju has a great chance at leading the NFL in terms of receiving yards and even potentially touchdowns up there with Devontae Adams.
Were you one of them kids at Juju's prom? The FAB crowd? Was that you? I heard.
They Skyped me in. They called me up. They said, "We know you can't be here for it, but we'd love you to chant FAB." And I was like, "Yeah, of course. I'm so glad you guys called me." And I was there in Skype, in spirit and whatnot, but not physically. No.
So I'm in a draft right now, an FF Champs draft with a group of industry insiders, including many people Dr. Roto, John Paulson, Matthew Berry, Matt Harmon, Liz Loza, Sigmund Bloom, Jeff Ratcliffe, Mike Clay, Evan Silva, Adam Ronitz. I mean, it's a pretty much a who's who kind of league. So going into this league, and it's a 2 quarterback league. So, there's a little difference here. But I know when I'm drafting with Sigmund Bloom, that I'm not getting Travis Kelce if he drafts ahead of me in the first round. And this draft was no different. He went 107. He went Travis Kelce. Granted, it's a tight end premium league, but I don't know that that's way out of line from what Sigmund Bloom is going to do at any case. So as I look at ADP, Justin, I see Travis Kelce, the 13th man, going off the board in best ball 10s. So where are you at on the tight end situation? And let's talk about all the big 3, where you're comfortable drafting them at.
Bloom was a big Gronk guy, too, so this is kind of his replacement with Travis Kelce.
This has been a years-long thing with me and Bloom where, if I'm in a draft with him, just who can go earlier?
Right. if it's a tight end premium league, obviously the value is, and Travis Kelce is 1A, and I think Zach Ertz is 1B, right? But round 2, I'm not going to draft Travis Kelce in front of Juju Smith-Schuster or Odell Beckham or the Dalvin Cooks, and now you're getting AB at the biggest discount we've ever gotten him at, or even Mike Evans for that matter. So you guys know how I feel about tight end, and it is a sea of mediocrity after Travis Kelce, Zach Ertz, and of course George Kittle. Now, Travis Kelce's, his value is obviously enhanced now that we don't know what's up with Tyreek Hill, do we?
No, and I, talking to the local guys, because I have talked to a handful of beat reporters on this issue, and I think the consensus seems to be, 8 games is what they're all guessing at right now, and they're all guessing just like you and I and Kyle are guessing right now, because that's all we can do. But I think it's safe to say at least 8 games, and I think that's kind of the expectation at this point. Of course, it could be more, and I'd be surprised if it was less, whether he's charged with anything or not.
Right.
This is how it works. So, but yes, that uncertainty there is in some part a driver for Travis Kelce.
Sure.
Certainly it's for Sammy Watkins at this point, but we'll talk about him a little bit later. But go ahead and go through the tight ends. Just in terms of Kelce, 13's too high for you?
It is.
Ahead of Julio Jones, ahead of Odell Beckham, ahead of Joe Mixon?
There is no way on any day that I'm going to draft Travis Kelce. And I mean, again, the argument can be made in a tight end premium league, but there's no day that I'm going to take Travis Kelce in front of Michael Thomas on a Saints offense that he's a large part of, or even a Le'Veon Bell, and certainly not Julio Jones. So there's he's one of these players, and Zach Ertz has fallen into that scope, and even George Kittle in the 3rd round is, you know what? They're great players. We love to watch them on Sundays, but you can go ahead and have them. I'm seeing in round 3, there's wide receiver value to be had in terms of the Keenan Allens, the Amari Coopers of the world, and even AJ Green, which we want to see just blow up and play 16 games. So there's no way I want either of those guys at that price tag. If you're going to grab one, I suppose it would be Kittle, because you're getting him later than Ertz and Kelce. But I'm one of these guys, and again, it is the sea of mediocrity where, I might go ahead and take a stab at O.J. Howard round 5 or an Evan Ingram round 6. And, Vance McDonald on what appears to be the more bleak Pittsburgh Steelers offenses that we've seen in a while, outside of Juju Smith-Schuster now and James Conner, right? So McDonald could have a good season in the sea of mediocrity, but after that, it's the Njokus of the world. And I'll tell you what, I am keen on Austin Hooper. I'm finding myself drafting him, obviously a big part of that Falcons offense, I think, going forward. Round 9, 10, give me some Austin Hooper over Kelce's price, Ertz's price, and Kittle's price any day of the week. It's too big of a gamble for me, those guys there.
I think there's some great value there. I know, Kyle, you have some thoughts on George Kittle in particular, why you like him at the bottom end of that range. And I'll let you talk about that a little bit if you want, but I'd like to know also, and by the way, when I mentioned Travis Kelce going 13, that does put him at, and this is best balls. This is not tight end premium scoring, ahead of Julio Jones, ahead of Odell Beckham, ahead of Joe Mixon, ahead of Juju Smith-Schuster, ahead of Dalvin Cook and Antonio Brown, amongst others. So, just an interesting dynamic going on in a regular, best ball type format. So I know you don't, you have some pretty good reasons, Kyle, for not being as keen on Kittle. Does that knock him out of your, the consideration? Is the asking price for him higher than you're willing to pay right now in best ball, or is it still within the range?
You've been reading my work, Bob, mostly because you're the editor of that work. But I do, you make a good point, or at least you lead me into my good point, that Kittle, I just think, one, I'm with Justin, that the value you get at tight end is typically skewed towards finding a late round tight end, a la George Kittle from last year, is what you're looking for. I think you'd have a guy like Vance McDonald maybe play that role, or even just paying up a little bit closer to someone like Hunter Henry. So yeah, but Kittle's a guy who produced yards after the catch like no other last year. I think it was dating, like the yards after the catch data isn't super deep, but as far as we know, it's probably the best yards after the catch season ever produced. By far, it's not even really that close. And when you see that type of outlier, either he's the greatest player of all time, or it's unsustainable. And I will go with the latter, saying it's unsustainable. I still think he's a great player. I just think they added more talent to that team, and he's going to regress to being a really good tight end as opposed to one of the greatest seasons we've ever seen. I can get on board with Kelce after the handful of receivers you named. I'm not as confident in the running backs you named. I think you had Joe Mixon, who I think on that offensive ceiling might be capped. Dalvin Cook, we've seen injuries. We've seen them give the ball to other players despite him being supposedly healthy. And any of the other running backs there, I just think running backs in more dangerous positions, especially when you get out of our favorite top 4 guys. And in your mind's eye, you can envision a world where Travis Kelce just plays that Rob Gronkowski peak Gronk role on the Patriots for this team that is probably running a faster paced offense without their touchdown scorer and Tyreek Hill. You can envision him getting an absurd 13, 14, 15 touchdowns. So I'm not going with it, but I can see if you want to play the highest possible outcome at that range. Sure, I can at least understand the logic behind that, but I'm probably not doing it.
And just to add on your point, Pro Football Focus, I'm trying to find which year they started doing this, but no player in the Pro Football Focus era has more yards after the catch in a single season than Kittle did last year, and that's not just tight ends. That's anybody, people. It's a lot.
It was a season where they lost Jimmy Garoppolo, right?
Right.
I mean, you Jerick McKinnon went down. There were high hopes for him, so it was kind of an offense that just came out. It did not nearly live up to its expectations. And George Kittle, similar to like Evan Ingram a couple of years ago, became the de facto wide receiver 1 with the Giants, and Kittle was force-fed, and so I would agree, Kyle, that it's going to be tough to duplicate what he did in 2018, and you're certainly paying a premium that I want no part of.
All right, I think we're all pretty, we're kind of falling into form with that first round, kind of the way it's been going, and the Saquon Barkley, Elliott McCaffrey, Kamara's first, then. Depending on how you feel, I agree. Hopkins, Devontae Adams for me is a guy that I'm trying to get an awful lot of. Michael Thomas up in that conversation as well. And Julio Jones, certainly you could have him in there. And then that group of running backs a little bit dicey. So that brings me up to the next point and you touched on it too, Justin. I'll start with Kyle though. Kyle, where do you want to draft? What draft position do you want going into a draft?
I really just don't want to make a top 3 pick because I feel like you're getting equal value at 1 as you are with 4, like we said. And beyond that, I don't even mind 5 or 6 because you get DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Adams, who I think are just behind. They're the Saquon Barkley and Ezekiel Elliott of receivers this year. Beyond that, I really like going at the turn because I've been stacking James Conner and Juju Smith-Schuster, who people just seem to doubt so much despite Pittsburgh having an elite offense for like most of my lifetime. And that's the lead receiver and the lead back on that team they're gonna throw the ball a lot, they're gonna jump off to the receiver a lot. I just don't see how you don't want to stack those 2 guys at the value you're getting them at. So if I'm not picking where I can end the running back tier or get one of my 2 favorite receivers, stacking the 2 studs in Pittsburgh is really something I like doing at the 112 2-1 turn.
Where are you drafting at, Justin? What's the ideal position?
I like to draft late on the later side because like I've made pretty clear over the years that I want a couple wide receivers, and that's I want to start with Julio Jones or Devontae Adams, and then loop back and grab Michael Thomas. If I can start my draft around 1, 2, and right out of the gates and have a Julio Jones and Michael Thomas, although they have the same bye week 9, you're off to a pretty good start. And one of the more recent best balls that I've done, I shot a picture for you two. 4 wide receivers I started with: Amari Cooper, Julio Jones, Juju Smith-Schuster, Keenan Allen, Stephon Diggs. So there's 4 wide receivers, 4 wide receiver ones right out of the gates, and then my running backs were absolutely fine. Which we can talk about some later running backs later. So typically I want to start late so I can attack wide receivers, and by the end of the draft I want to look at my team and say, on paper tonight I have the best wide receivers in this draft or league.
Yeah, I'm kind of, so what I've figured out so far in all of this is I don't want to draft her. That first pick, I don't like the long turnaround. I don't like that wait. Runs can happen. You get shut out of things. Mm-hmm. You have to be a little more proactive. If there are guys you really want to get, you really have to, on occasions reach for them if you really want them. So that's a little bit of an issue for me. I prefer the second half of the draft, and the later the better. If I get down into that 10, 11, 12 range, I'm fine with that as well. And for a lot of the reasons Justin outlined. So, Justin, let me ask you who are some of the value plays you're finding? And go ahead and just, run us through each position. Some guys, maybe one guy at each position that you think is getting great value right now.
Well, you mentioned Sammy Watkins from the get-go, and I know you're keen on Sammy Watkins. We've been talking about him for a couple of years. If Tyreek Hill doesn't play and doesn't look like he's good, now you have Sammy Watkins paired up with arguably the best quarterback in the league. So give me Sammy Watkins round 5 or 6 tonight. It might go up, given waiting on the Tyreek Hill news. But Sammy Watkins is well capable of over 1,000-yard season. I would love to see what he could do with Patrick Mahomes. Jarvis Landry is dipping. Obviously, he's been banged up, but from a running back angle, and I do like Tyler Lockett. I think Tyler Lockett, he's one of these home run hitters we like. I'm fine with him rounds 5 or 6, but the Tariq Cohens of the world are kicking around round 5 or 6. Now, he was a guy top 12 PPR last season on a pretty damn good Bears offense. I know they got rid of Jordan Howard. I know they drafted David Montgomery to kind of take on that role. I'm fine with Tariq Cohen. I think his role is carved out, 50, 60, 70 receptions. And now when you dip down lower, you will see Ronald Jones round 8, Jordan Howard round 8. And Jordan Howard's 24 years old. He's going to be playing behind an offensive line that's damn good, and offensive line matters in fantasy football. Jordan Howard's a volume running back. We know he's non-existent in the passing game. I'm fine round 8. Ronald Jones, a lot of buzz on a potentially awesome Bucs offense. We've been saying that for years, right? And these are the running backs that I want to have a part of. I'm willing to gamble at that stature because I'm not exhausting a round 2 or 3 pick. So that's where I'm there. Now, in terms of tight end, I mentioned Vance McDonald. I mentioned Austin Hooper. Fine with those guys. These guys are tight end ones. Does not take much to be a tight end one. You can be a 55 reception, 600 yard, 4 or 5 touchdown guy. I'm fine with that. So that's where I'm at now. In terms of quarterback, you want me to touch on quarterback? We're waiting on quarterbacks. Yeah. That is just the way it is. It's a pass happy league. So give me the Kirk Cousins of the world. Give me the Ben Roethlisbergers. Obviously, Phillip Rivers. We're still gonna jump on his back.
Love the Phillip Rivers.
It's not sexy, and sexy is you want to play with people that. In fact, the guy before we recorded was telling me how he's duping people into drafting Patrick Mahomes in auction leagues because they get so excited about him. Yeah. They blow their whole knot on Patrick Mahomes, and then you and I are their wide receivers for $1. So obviously. Quarterback, you can just sit around and wait unless you want to pay. Andrew Luck, I think, could finish quarterback 1. I'm fine with him, but I'm certainly not going to pay the Patrick Mahomes premium. Andrew Luck can get round 4. The Deshaun Watsons, there's some intrigue there, and Baker Mayfield with the weaponry around him. So, look, you wait on quarterbacks, and that is just the bottom line.
Yeah, my last best ball, and you mentioned Kirk Cousins, a guy who's pretty much fallen off the radar, but I mean, he finished, as horrible as he was last year, it was a top 10, fantasy finish. So yeah, they're waiting in the double digit rounds. I mean, the last draft I was in, Lamar Jackson, Phillip Rivers, Tom Brady, Dak Prescott, Mitch Trubisky, Kyler Murray, Carson Wentz, all went in the 12th round of the last best ball I was in. And that still left plenty of guys to go later, including Derek Carr, who, if Antonio Brown is going to be 3/4 of Antonio Brown, Derek Carr is going to have to get busy, right? And I mean, we laugh at Derek Carr, but here's a guy in his first 2 seasons threw the second most touchdowns in the history of the game for a quarterback behind only Dan Marino. Right. So it's, and best ball, though, is where you take that chance, right? Because you get a couple other guys. So Kyle, give me some of your value plays.
Yeah, I'll start off with quarterback. Oh, that 12th round you read off to me was so good sounding. Kyler Murray is a guy who I think I have ranked in my top 5. I have rankings for one of the many magazines you'll be putting out. Kyler Murray is a guy who I can see doing what, I don't want to say Lamar Jackson because he's probably the greatest quarterback rusher of all time, but producing close to that in terms of rushing.
Well, Kyler Murray can throw, so there's
exactly. that. Exactly. He can produce a large portion of what Lamar Jackson can do rushing. And he profiles to be a great thrower. He has, I think, is the best adjusted yards per attempt and yards per attempt for a quarterback in college of all time in a single season. I mean, and that's something you see basically like Russell Wilson, Baker Mayfield, QBR is something Cam Newton really excelled in that Kyler Murray is up there, if not the best of all time. And basically, when you look at the best seasons in college football, it's Kyler Murray and the rest. So he's a guy who I'm all over. But Lamar Jackson goes even a few rounds later often. I can't really ask this question with any suspense anymore, but I'll just say it. The most quarterback rushing attempts in the history of the NFL, Lamar Jackson did it in 7 starts. That is, I mean, he's a running back. He's really is a running back that you can sometimes maybe get a passing touchdown out of. LT was like that. So those are
how does that work out? Yep. Go ahead.
Running back, I love, strangely, Nyheim Hines. He's just a guy who I think got incredible PPR value last year, especially this is almost exclusively PPR, but he was a guy who got incredible PPR volume. He has one of the best seasons in terms of being a receiving back as a rookie ever. And he's sort of like putting Giovanni Bernard on an Andrew Luck offense, so I'll buy into that just because he's so incredibly cheap. Carlos Hyde, because I'm all team fade Damian Williams, just because it's his either fifth or sixth year. The 5th or 6th year breakout for undrafted free agents is essentially unheard of. I think 2 guys in the history of the NFL have done it before. So that's just, he's the guy who I am projecting the most points for if you just do standard projections compared to I'm drafting him so much later. He's the guy with the biggest difference there. So if I'm fading him, I have to take someone, and for me it's Carlos Hyde. And then moving on to wide receiver, I love me some Tyrell Williams. I forget, somebody sniped me on him in the experts mock we were in, and I was in the middle of writing him up as my sleeper, and I got sniped on him. But if you just look at the open volume on the Raiders, they are by far and away the most open team. Even if Antonio Brown comes in to dominate, they still need a number 2. And like you're saying, Derek Carr people used to think he was good, and then shockingly, he had Amari Cooper as his only weapon. They didn't utilize him correctly, so he had no real good weapons.
And no pass protection.
Yeah, and
right.
He had a bad offensive line. Basically, he had a horrible situation, and then people said he sucked. Well, I mean, one thing is consistent there. He had a bad situation in those years. Now he's got a way better receiving core. He's got a good running back, or at least a guy who they drafted to be a good running back. I think everything's turning around for him. He's a guy who, another quarterback, basically you can get at the end. Like, if you completely punt the position, I love taking him just because, like you said, if you project Antonio Brown to be good, if you're like me, you think Tyrell Williams will be good, Derek Carr at least has to be usable, so he's a guy I love. Tyrell Williams, and then Kenny Stills is one final guy late that I really love getting. Just an electric player. He was produced ever since he was one of the younger players in the NFL, rookie in New Orleans. He was producing early in his career, and that's usually predictive of later career success. And who else are they going to throw to? I know the Devontae Parker hype is getting big, and I know we're all excited for the 10th year breakout for him, but fifth year in a row, camp MVP, Devontae Parker, I've given up hope on after 2 or 3 of those.
At some point, we have to decide that the biggest, fastest guy who can only run in a straight line is not going to serve you extremely well at the NFL level. But hey, that route running is still coming on. And by the way, in the Derek Carr point that you mentioned, and I mentioned, maybe I kind of led the way on this, is, boy, if you think all these guys are going to be really good, doesn't Derek Carr have to be really good? I remember saying the same thing about Eli Manning last year, and that worked out really well for me. So, so there's that. I mean, look, but I mean, these are the kind of connections I'm making mentally, as at drafting at this time of year. And, I like some of those guys that you mentioned an awful lot. There's some backs I like that are going a little earlier than I'd like them to, but I think Tevin Coleman's in line. Look, the last time he was with Kyle Shanahan, it was an 11 touchdown season for him playing, sharing with Devonta Freeman. So, and I don't know how much he's going to be sharing, honestly. I don't see any of these other guys healthy just yet. But that brings up a point I would like to make, and I always try to make. Don't look down the drinking straw. I'm in a draft today. I saw Damian Harris get drafted. Why is that? Because we heard Sony Michel hasn't been at 2 mandatory minicamp practices, and nobody knows why. People see that, and they'll make a move based on that, right? I mean, it's a natural thing. But this just, keep in mind where it is. We just got into June, people. So, there are going to be things happening. You need to pay attention to them, but keep them in context. Don't make draft moves based on those. And I say that carries into training camp, right? You got to look at the big picture. Don't look at the day-to-day, minute by minute. Oh, this guy got extra reps today. Well, a lot of guys get extra reps certain days. And a lot of times veterans get days off. Don't freak out over it. Put it in context with other things. I think, the Kyler Murray pick is one that I like making, in the double-digit rounds. And I'll do the same thing with him that I did in a few leagues with Mahomes, against the advice of Justin Lonero, I'll mind you. But you take you take a little bit of a reach on Kyler Murray. Maybe grab him a little early, but you can do that. And by a little early, I mean maybe, as you're getting into the double-digit rounds,
yeah,
maybe round 10.
The difference between the 10th and the 11th, the 9th and the 10th, in terms of like what you're expected to get, you're expected
Right.
9-01 versus 10-11 or 10-12 is nothing. Like the difference there is not like you're reaching 10 picks from the second to the first round. The expected difference is so minimal that don't worry about reaching past round like 8 or 9 multiple rounds. Just to be very clear, if you like Kyler, get him, Bob.
Make that reach, and then a couple rounds later or a round after, get that Phillip Rivers, get that Carson Wentz, get that, my guy, Phillip Rivers, who I cannot get enough of. I mean, there's going to be plenty of guys that are available to you later in the drafts. And I don't want to get too caught up in the current value, but I still can't let go of guys like, Jordan Reed, Tyler Eifert. I know they're going late. I know the story on these guys. I know this, I know that they have a hard time playing entire seasons, but best ball is what these guys are made for when you don't have to pick the weeks that they're going to show up. Man, if you get a couple weeks out of them, the price right now you're paying for these guys is ridiculously low. And that's the thing I would say. In the last 5 rounds, if you're in the best ball 10s, it's a 20-round draft. Go crazy, kids. Go crazy. Pick these guys. Pick your Devontae Parkers or whoever, any of these guys that you kind of like that are coming off big things. I've seen Rob Gronkowski picked, in the 20th round of a couple of best ball things that I've been in. You know what? Because that's where you make that pick, and I get it. So there's that going on. Just a couple last thoughts, just in general on best ball. The best ball format. I'll start with you, Kyle. How much different is your strategy? And I kind of hinted at this for me. It's not as different in the first, say, 6 to 8 rounds, but then it starts going off the rails a little bit, and I start ending up with Tyler Eiferts and guys like that late in the draft. But do you handle it that same way, or what's your approach?
Yeah, I want to say I will stick to a more rigid roster construction in general. I'm basically going 5 or 6 running backs, 7 or 8 receivers every time. That depending on if your format needs defense, it's some form of 2 quarterback, 2 tight end, 2 defense, add 1 extra to any one of those. And I'm pretty much sticking within that parameter unless I want to go with a contrarian. I know something that's actually worked, I believe has a positive win rate is the hyper fragile, like starting with 3 RBs. Stuff like that. Or too early tight end, which for me would probably be Kelsey Ertz, except talk about me fading Kittle. Stuff like that. Outside of trying to make these contrarian ones, if I'm drafting in a normal, basically that only happens if things fall perfect for me, that I'll do something weird like hyper fragile. But so outside of that, it's pretty much a rigid structure, and when I select them is very much depicted on who I think will get to me at the end. Right now, for me, it's wide receivers. I'm not loving many of the late running backs. There's not much. I like Alexander Madison. I think he's got a chance to get upwards of double-digit touches throughout the season, even if per game. Even if Dalvin Cook doesn't get hurt, another guy I like is Raquel Armstead. But outside of like a handful of those guys, it's more like I love Kenny Stills, I love Tyrell Williams, Christian Kirk's another guy. If you're taking Kyler Murray, how are you not stacking those guys? So because I see so much wide receiver value, I'm really prone to taking running backs early. And of course, you have to get all the onesie positions. You still have to get 2 to 3 of, just because in our experts draft, I think I forgot to draft a kicker, and I was like, I don't care. I'll sign Roberto Aguayo, the homie. R.I.P. to the homie. He'll sign with the team. I'll pick him up. You don't need to. Same with defense, even. Find out who the Titans play week 1. They have a bad opponent. I'll pick up them. Which you can't do that. You just can't do that in best ball. But like you said, Bob, I don't think it differs as much as people think. Just one more thing is I'm typically going super risk averse through the first 4 rounds, because a lot of the work shows that basically the win rates in the first 4 rounds, the amount of times a player was drafted and that team went on to win, are more skewed towards the lower end in the early rounds, meaning that you can lose your draft early. Ask Le'Veon Bell owners last year. You can lose your draft early. You can't necessarily win your draft early. You're not getting these insane win rates early in the draft for the most part. So I'm making safe picks, trying to secure moderate win rate guys, and then going for, balls to the wall, go crazy in the 11th round, pick a guy who you think will go in the 15th, because if I think he's going to be good, I don't care if I make that reach. So that's sort of my general outline of my strategy.
Look at Kyle coming out hot on this pod with a number of pretty reasonable takes in my estimation. So I'll count on you, Justin, to put us back in crazy territory. What's the overall approach for you? And I think specifically something Kyle mentioned too, I want you to touch on is, at the onesie positions, how deep are you going? And does that depend on maybe the risks, the level of risk you're taking? Like I mentioned, if I'm getting Eifert and Reed, I'm probably getting more than just those two, right? At tight end. So, I mean, talk a little bit about the approach in that regard.
It doesn't vary too much for me. I mean, I'm going to do exactly what you said in the first 6 or 7 rounds. I want to build my foundation, right? This is going to be my starting lineup, hopefully week 1 permitting there's an injury. But, after that, you obviously best balls, it's your team. This is it, right? So you need balance. And typically I'm going to have 3 quarterbacks because – I want 3 good quarterbacks because I want to have an opportunity to win each week. But just in case of an injury, I need 3. I'm going to have 5 or 6 running backs, and I'm going to have 5 or 6 wide receivers. And I'm also going to have 3 tight ends that are probably dead in the middle of the sea of mediocre. If I invest in a running back, I am more than likely going to grab his handcuff. Kenyon Drake, Kalen Ballage. I'm finding myself doing that because if something happens to this running back that I've invested in, for instance, Tevin Coleman, I might want Matt Breida. I might need some Jerick McKinnon, or you avoid the situation altogether because this is your team. This is it. If it's plagued with injuries, you're screwed. You're going to, burn your money. I want balance. I want to hedge a little bit. And I also want to, protect my investments. There's no sniping in this. This is your team. Again, on draft, there's no defenses. So it gives you, an extra, round to be able to draft 3 tight ends, and certainly the Chris Herndons and the Jordan Reeds of the world are finding their way on my team, and Trey Burton has come at a discount. I think Trey Burton has top 5 or 6 tight end upside in my opinion on that Bears offense. So I'm going to have 3 tight ends. I think it's a must, and I'm almost always going to have 3 quarterbacks again for 2 reasons, because I want top 12 output each week, and I don't want either of you guys to have them. So that's just.
Yes, I have seen that part. And I guess, by the way, Trey Burton coming off had, the big abdominal core surgery this offseason. If you'll remember, late last year, it kind of turned up suddenly with an injury, and said, he had some anxiety, his body locked up, which I thought was pretty concerning to me, just in general. And I know Matt Nagy didn't seem any too pleased with that, with all that talk, and that his lack of availability, that he ultimately had to undergo surgery to get the problem repaired. I'd be interested to know how severe it was, but the fact that it wasn't just a mental issue is kind of is somehow a little bit comforting to me. I will second some of the things you guys have said there in terms of the strategy. I think some of this depends on how many contests you play in. And look, these all cost a little bit of money to get into, so that's part of the deal. I'll end up probably drafting 50 best ball teams before all is said and done, cutting back from last year to some degree because I didn't start as early. But I do think that the more you're in, the more you can experiment, and the more chances you can take. And then you start watching your percentages of ownership on guys, because it's easy to get too in on a guy when you're drafting in multiple leagues. And I know most of these sites you can go in and you can check your ownership percentage on any given player and kind of mitigate that a little bit if need be. And I think another kind of thing that I like to do is maybe draft 2 guys that might be sharing a role as long as it's late enough. Like last year, I think it was Albert Wilson and Danny Amendola were the pairing, and that ended up kind of being not an ineffective thing to do. So watch that late in drafts where you can, like I said, those last 5 rounds, you can get into all kinds of chicanery and not destroy yourselves as long as you have solid drafts early. So there we have it. I think we set the table there, fellows, for the best ball type of play. And anything you want to chip in there, Kyle, to kind of put a bow on on your thoughts?
No, I think we covered everything really well. I just wanted to say before we go, make sure if you want to get into the Scott Fish Bowl, I know it's something like I think we talk about. Everyone's dream who's in the Scott Fish Bowl is to take down number 1 spot, beat every fantasy analyst you've ever heard of that's ever come across your Twitter timeline. But at the end of the day, it is all really for a great cause. So I think that's something, I love the fact that we are all playing this stupid game about a game, a bunch of grown men playing with a football, but we can make a difference is great. So just if you want to get in the Scott Fish Bowl, make sure you check out any of our Twitters. I assume we all retweeted Justin's tweet with the entry to the Scott Fish Bowl. Just retweet that, give us a review on iTunes. If you come in the top 493, I guess it'll be a bit different because of the amount of people. And basically, if you come in the top half, you're better than all of us last year. I think Justin was first out of us at 494. I was just looking at it before the show. Bob, you just beat me. You were 864 out of 900, and I was 884. So, our best ball advice.
Neither of us should be extremely proud of that.
Yeah,
right?
we crushed best ball last year. I'm sure, Bob, you had a great season. I think I had a positive ROI. I know I did on draft. I didn't play a ton on MFL 10, but I know I had a positive ROI on draft. Best ball advice, we're the best. There's nobody better. Scott Fishbowl advice, I don't know. I'm sure Scott has some good pod recommendations. Maybe don't check us out there. But we'll try to get back to you with that. I think we'll do either a late June podcast in a few weeks, give everyone a lot of time to sign up for that Scott Fishbowl invitation, if not early July. So make sure you go retweet that. Any last words? If not, I think you can find us all on Twitter, Bob Football Diehard, myself at Kyle Tweets Here, and Justin at Justin Lonero. Justin, you want to send us home?
I just wanted to know if were you getting tickled? There, it sounded like you were getting tickled a little bit. You were giggling.
That's something they do on the Disturbing the Peace pod. We don't do that here.
Yeah. No, I'm eager to talk to you guys more. Obviously, things are heating up, and we're going to be on this podcast a lot more frequently. And when the regular season comes into play, it'll be DFS. I mean, we have a large scope of things that we discuss. And head over to footballdiehards.com. The content is coming. The magazines are going to be on stand soon, which is awesome. And I look forward to speaking with you men really soon.
All right, thanks for listening.